books that I've read and all of the reviews I've recorded that I'm this close to being behind, I think it's probably because I didn't love those books and therefore they don't go in my December column. And I think the other thing is, like, this book, Halos by Kristen Heitzmann, I thought I'd love it and I didn't. So I have to read another book and hopefully love it and then record it and then go on my merry way. Oh, I think I'm just really hard to please. Can we, maybe that's the problem. Speaking of today's book, I must have been a really big sap when I was younger because I loved this book. It has been, let's see, I read it when I was in college. So 15-ish years since I've read this book. I don't know what I was thinking. I really don't. Probably some of it is me changing because it is very Hallmark movie, and we know I hate Hallmark movies because I'm far too cynical for all of that sappy romance. The other thing was, this is a Christian fiction novel, and I like Christian fiction. I like the morals and the message that they have, but this book in particular made me realize why people do not like Christian fiction. Just kind of roll your eyes and are like, oh my gosh, could anything be more perfect? I liked the plot of this novel. So all I remembered was this down inner luck girl gets stranded in this small town. She has this thing for halos. Her name is Alessa Lessy. Her name is Lessy Moore. She is traveling from Florida and she's going up north. It's Christmas time and she needs gas. So she sees a sign for this town named Charity and there's a halo around it. So she's like, good things are gonna happen there. This is where she decides to pull off and get gas. The thing is, the book is published in 2004. It reads very 90s. So even down to the type of candy that the guy sells in his bookstore, I'm just like, oh my gosh, you're my grandma. So it reads very 90s. So I don't really know what time period the book's supposed to be set in. In any case, she pulls up to this gas station in this one-horse town. She's standing outside. She's trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue. She goes inside to pay, turns around, and her car is gone. First off, the thing about Lessy, as I said, down on her luck. The car was a gift from her uncle. She grew up poor because her mother had been wealthy, married the pool boy, was disinherited. The father dies soon after. So when her mother dies of cancer when she's about 12, she is taken in by her mother's brother. And you get the idea that they don't like her very much. They think she's a hindrance to them. The one thing he does do is, upon her 18th birthday, buy her this really nice red Mustang. It's her pride and joy. She spends whatever money she has to upkeep it and things like that. So the fact that she would leave her keys in her prized car, I know it's the catalyst for the entire novel, but it seems out of character, except for the fact, we'll just chalk it up to the fact that she doesn't believe anything bad can happen to her in this town because it had a halo around it, and so she's expecting good things. So let's just put the blame there. That is the reason that she did something you wouldn't think she would do, considering how much this car means to her. Now she's in this town and she's stranded. She has no money, she has no clothes, she has absolutely nothing. She has no cell phone because cell phones aren't a thing whenever this novel is set. And the owner of the gas station offers to let her stay in his spare room because his roommate is out of town. Well, wouldn't you know, the roommate comes back early. And the three guys are Ben, Dave, and Steve. I believe Ben is the owner of the gas station. Dave, I think, works at the gas station. And then Steve owns the bookstore. He had been on a trip because really where his money comes from is buying antique books. So he'd been on this trip. He comes back early and he is none too pleased to see Lessy in his room. We're going to get into this thing of, it's a dual narration, and I could have done without Steve's point of view. It wasn't a very big book, so his point of view really gave a hefty chunk of the novel, but okay, don't get mad at me for this. I thought Steve was awfully emotional. I kind of likened him to a female sometimes in the way that his emotions swayed and the thoughts that he had. For me, that was not appealing. It wasn't attractive. When she first meets him, he's very surly. I would have liked if we had maintained that wall so that he might be having his conflicting emotions, which are natural, which are completely okay for men to have. But I thought the novel would have been stronger if we hadn't seen them. Because on top of that, he gave me a lot of emotional whiplash. If you don't see where this is going, that is her love interest. We first meet him, and he's like, why is this girl in my room? It's putting me out, but oh my gosh, she's kind of cute. And that's sort of what you keep getting, is he treats her like crap when we're on her side, when we're in her point of view. And then when on his point of view, he's acknowledging the fact that he's treated her like crap, but then all he wants to do is kiss her. So he's known her for like a day, and then he kisses her. And I was just like, why? Like, you don't like her. So what was it that compelled you to kiss her? I do get this whole, I shouldn't like her, but I do like her. And so I would have been okay with, okay, yes, I'm attracted to her, and I'm probably doing something that I shouldn't because it's far too soon and we are having this antagonistic relationship. But he continues to go back and treat her like crap and disbelieve everything she has to say. So there was nothing that made me want him and her to be together. There's nothing that was like, okay, yes, this is the guy, and this is why he should be kissing her. I was just like, make up your mind already. That said, Lessy, nobody in this town will help her. Nobody in this town will accept the fact that somebody stole her car. And here is a little, or a big spoiler. There had been this fella in their town who had been extremely abusive. He ended up murdering his wife. The town formed a mob and ended up killing him. They formed this pact saying that they were gonna basically live godly lifestyles. They were gonna accept people and they were gonna forgive people and they're just gonna move forward. Because they signed this pact, it meant that they could not or would not believe that somebody else from their town stole Lessy's car. I had a lot of issues with this on many levels. I understand wanting to think the best of people. I do. So I could understand them being like, okay, we believe that you got stranded here. We believe that somebody stole your car, but I really just don't think it would be somebody from our town. Instead, every single person she asked would slam a door in her face. When she went to the sheriff, and I can't figure out if he was investigating low-key or if he wasn't investigating at all, but he basically was like, I can't help you. I don't believe you. Like, nobody took your car. And then all of this, throughout all of this, I'm like, how is she ever gonna get out of this town? If she has absolutely no money because she had taken every last cent she had out of the bank and all of that was in her car, how is she ever gonna earn enough money to leave? How can she get a bus ticket out of there if it doesn't seem like there's any buses? So I'm just like, this girl just needs her car. People, if you want her out of your hair, just help her get her car. Like, it's not that hard. This town that has renamed itself Charity and is supposed to be based on such godly biblical principles, I would have expected at least on some level them to acknowledge the fact that the Christian thing to do is to at least help her in some way, for somebody to believe her, for somebody to be kind to her at least. The only kind people in this town are Ben and Dave, their girlfriends, and I think one other girl who I had a little bit of a hard time keeping track of all the names, but she wasn't a girlfriend. I think she was somebody who may have had a crush on Steve because he's like the only eligible bachelor in this entire town. No matter the age, all of these women are coming after him. So I think that's who she was. Of course, all of them are so sick, like the females at least, are so sickly sweet that it was hard. Let's put a pin right here and say the narrations, because I loved this book when I was in college, I said, okay, I'll just buy the book and can I please get my $16 back because it was not worth my money. And I really dislike, and this was something that I had a problem with Redeeming Love. The narrator is probably in her 40s. She's midlife at least. The main character is 23. Why do we have such an old narrator? I mean, granted, I'm almost to that age myself, so I'm calling myself out. But there is a distinct quality. It's very grandmotherly, the way this woman reads. And can I say, you know, every time she smacks her lips, all of her mouth noises, and this also lent itself towards 90s. It was very 90s. I did not like the narration. And then I didn't like the way that she voiced her characters because it made them even more sickly sweet than they were written. So I think I would have liked this book better if I could have read it, but I have no idea where I put my copy. I guess my subconscious knew I wasn't going to like this book, and I simply did not have time because I bought the ebook as well. I simply just didn't have time to sit down and read the ebook. The narration did not help. And can I ask, I don't remember exactly where they are. I think they're in the northeast somewhere at this point. Enough because it's snowing, like snow. And she had driven up from Florida, so it, however, like 2 or so days in the car. Ben and Dave almost sounded like country buffoons. Not really Southern, and I don't really know why I keep thinking country because they weren't that country, but they sounded like buffoons. And then Steve sounds like he's straight out of Chicago. Like he's some mafia boss or something. And I was like, where did this come from if they all grew up at the same place? So it was very off-putting when Steve would speak because he was extremely harsh. And I know he was supposed to be a harsh character, but then the accent she gave him, it didn't make sense. And then Lessy, I think I would have liked her more if she'd had some oomph to her, but there was nothing behind her that made her sound like she had any substance. She was just that meek girl who has gotten stranded, and she, oh my gosh, she had no flaws whatsoever. And it was just problematic. Anyways, back to, let's take that pin out. We've got these girlfriends, and so they are nice to Lessy. Ben and Dave are nice to Lessy, and Steve is sort of nice to Lessy. At least he lets her stay. Yeah, he comes home, she stays that night, and then this is when we learn that he's the only eligible bachelor in town, and she's saving him from these women who are coming after him at his bookstore, and this one in particular who doesn't know the meaning of the word no, and she's like, oh, well, you have to spend Christmas with us. And he's like, I can't. And he's having a hard time coming up with a lie. So Lessy steps in and she's like, oh, he's spending it with me. First off, if this town is as small as it seems to be, which it has like 80 people inside its township, if I were this other girl, Amanda, I would have been like, who is this person? I guess at this point, yes, they had told the sheriff that her car had been stolen, but I would have been like, you don't know her. Where did she come from? Like, I've never heard of her. So where did you pull her out of that you're all of a sudden spending Christmas with her? Anyways, Lessy steps in and she's like, yeah, we're spending Christmas together. He decides to use this as a way to ward off all of these women. And his backstory is that he kind of has women trust issues because his mother had left when he was really young, and then he had been engaged, and all of a sudden she decides to leave him. So this is another reason why he's really surly and he's just not nice to Lessy. But he, and all of a sudden, he opened the door for her lie. And then all of a sudden he's like, well, that lie came really quickly to your lips. Did it really? Like, you're the one that said you were going to be spending Christmas with somebody else. Who else would it be believable except for this girl sitting right here? He decides, I'm going to use this to my advantage. He hires her on at his big bookstore, and then he lets her sleep in the back room as a way to, you know, give her some money, keep her around, blah, 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 blah. We go through the novel, and she literally has people slam doors in her face. She's going absolutely nowhere, which at least in this book, the main character is trying to do something. She's not just sitting around while somebody else does all the work, even if nobody will help her. And I mean, I will say, in the end, it was a nice tie back, because at the Christmas Eve service, I think it's Ben gets up front and he's like, look, you guys, when Jesus came, nobody had room for him. Nobody would give him the time of day. Now we have this other stranger in our midst, and this is how you treat her. So he did tie it back around, which I wish I could have kept this in my December lineup. It would have been perfect for Christmas. Oh no, it turned out to be a crappy book. It did have a nice tie-in where these people find themselves to be very devout, yet they've rejected this stranger that came into their midst, just like the early Christians rejected Christ. But I thought it would have been better if more people, like with Steve, how he didn't outright reject her, he didn't believe her. I wish more people would have been like, you know, obviously she got here somehow. Instead, they were like, oh, you must have been dumped. Oh, you must have stolen this car. Oh, blah, like all these reasons for why she got stuck in their town. Everybody was just so mean. I was like, granted, there's only 80 people in this town, but I find it very hard to believe that they are dictated, this pact have led them to be dictated by these certain morals and standards, yet this is how they treat a stranger. Every person thinks she's accusing them of stealing her car when she's like, I'm just asking if you've seen it. She does give a speech at one point, which could definitely make it seem like she's throwing stones at them, but I had a lot of issues with the depiction of this town. And I mean, as I said, it's fine if they reject her, but I thought it could have been done in a different way. Let me kind of stop here. The whole book takes place in like 3 weeks. And as I've said, Steve is the love interest. By the end of this 3 weeks, okay, what was it? What book did I just review? The Disappearances, I think it was, where I was like, is 3 months the watermark for being in love? This book is 3 weeks. I was like, seriously? What about, like, when I was 19 or 20, 21, like, why did I like that so much? Why did I not think that was so cringeworthy? Maybe because I was not disillusioned. Maybe because at 19, 20, 21, I thought this aged Beth would have more going on in her personal life than she does. So she could swallow this kind of nausea better. 3 weeks passes, and throughout this 3 weeks, she solves everybody's problems because she has no flaws. Like, if anything, her flaw is she is too much of a martyr. Who is it? Either Ben or Dave. One of them is involved with a woman who has 2 daughters. She was in an abusive relationship, and Lessy comes in and is like, why won't you marry him? Like, why won't you give him a chance? And she, like, solves all of their problems in one conversation. She is just, it's disgusting how perfect she is. She decides that she can't stay any longer. I forget the reason. It just has something to do with Steve and martyrdom. Like, I can't do this to him. She has been tormented slightly, like a couple of events. Somebody has been tormenting her, the person who took her car. She's walking out of town. This person drives up behind her. Here's some spoilers. It is the pastor's son. And can I just talk about this pastor? I can't figure out if I'm supposed to like him or not. He's very like Joel Osteen. I don't know if he is supposed to be a good, honest pastor or if he is a farce. But in any case, the thing with their son, Carl, is that he's actually adopted, and he is the biological son of the guy I told you about earlier who killed his wife. He is like their redemption. This kid he's like 18 at this point. He is supposed to be like, they've taken him in, the whole town. He is their redemption. Turning him and making him anything but like his father is their way of atoning for their sins of murdering his dad. We get bits and pieces of Carl where you're like, I get the uncomfortable feeling around him. Now he stole the car, not because of who it belonged to, because apparently Lessy was very similar in appearance to his mother, but just because he could. And then it was the icing on the cake that she looked like his mother, and this is why he then began to torture her. He comes up alongside her, chases her down, and he tries to strangle her to death. And can somebody please tell me, Steve had woken up at not long after, and he realizes she's gone, so he comes after her. So literally, like, she's being strangled. She sees his car, he parks, he's whatevering. Maybe a minute later is when he comes across her. Is that really enough time for her to practically go brain dead? Carl runs off. Steve and Ben take her to the hospital. They are now faced with this decision of take her off life support. Turns out the hospital then found this family that nobody believed she had, or at least to the extent that this family had rejected her. And it was kind of like, here's your car, see you never. And the family is like, yeah, just take her off. This is Christmas Eve, so then Christmas Day, and I can't figure out what kind of a Christian Steve is supposed to be. Lessy is like this uber Christian who does nothing wrong except harbor guilt and be a martyr. He's sitting in church and he's like, why? Okay, this made me laugh, chuckle, scoff. Because it was the pastor involved in all of this, and Steve knew it was Carl that had attacked Lessy. There was no pastor. So Ben gets up to talk about this whole, like, you rejected Christ, you rejected Lessy. And Steve is like, why would he get up there and be preaching at a time like this? Well, why did you go to church? If you weren't there for a sermon, why did you go to church? This then, I guess, convicts the entire population of Charity. So then everybody's like, oh yeah, we'll form a prayer circle and we'll sign up to pray for her so that every second of the day somebody's praying for her because she's brain dead. God performs a miracle and she is healed. In the interim, Carl is hiding out in this shelter that he and his biological father had built. We get some flashbacks seeing about like his mother's murder and his father's abuse and why he is the way he is. This whole thread of her missing car and this person who is terrorizing her was actually quite good. Even to that extent, I didn't mind that this town rejected her because it all creates this level of suspense, mystery, and of disillusionment. I wish it had been done slightly different, but I thought, like, instead of having Steve, the bread and butter was really Carl and Duke and his abuse and the murder of his wife and this dark secret that this town is harboring. And we got very little of it. And then, can I just say, I've been telling you, dual narration, all of a sudden we get Carl's point of view. He was so evil and so dark. I liked it. I thought he was really intriguing, but it came too late in the novel. There wasn't enough of it for me to want it. And so I think instead of having Steve, we should have had Carl the entire time. So Lessy and Carl battling, because I thought we should have seen more of this person that took her car and the why and the secret the town was harboring, because there is a slight allusion to something's going on with the town, to, like, not that they won't talk to you, but they can't talk talk to you. Nobody would do this in our town. So I was like, I wish we'd explored that. But it's mentioned so much in passing that it's almost unnecessary. Sometimes things are dropped and you don't realize they're important until they're important. But because it was so unimportant, I was skeptical as to why it was basically the crux of the novel. Like why this event in the town was then why nobody would believe a Lessy at all. Like it needed more. I started skipping. I was like, I don't need all this sappy Hallmark movie stuff about how Steve is crying over her hospital bed. I really didn't need it. If like this will turn you off. And so I started skipping, but somehow the pastor finds him. Carl breaks down. The pastor is able to convince him to come with him and like atone for his sins and things like that. As I said, Lessy then gets better. She and Steve declare their love for each other, or maybe not so many words, and they live happily ever after. It was a huge letdown. I thought it would have been nice to get more of her family because I liked, from her perspective, she thought that they hated her. But I thought it would have been kind of interesting if maybe that was just her perception. And we got one instance in which we get a flashback. Steve says something, and it makes her flashback to something her aunt said to her when her cousin was actually the culprit. So this is the only thing we get of the abuse and disdain that her family has for her. So I thought it would have been kind of interesting if maybe we would have given her more depth by saying she thinks that her family doesn't love her, but maybe they do. Maybe they're worried about her. Maybe they're wondering where she's gone because they haven't heard from her in 2 years. And then the nail in the coffin would have been like, oh yes, the family says pull the plug. Okay then, there we go. That's the answer to our question. But she had absolutely no depth, and it drove me crazy because I was like, can she do something wrong? Instead, it was like Steve had all the flaws in their relationship, and she had none. None. Like, she didn't doubt her faith. She didn't blame God for her circumstances in life. She didn't blame God for what happened with her car being stolen. I mean, she solved everybody else's problems. She was really great at selling books, and she made Steve fall in love with her in 3 weeks. Because obviously she was far more beautiful than she gives herself credit for. And I am super disappointed, and I would really love for iTunes to give me my refund. Is that a thing? I hope that's a thing. Let me know what you think, and Happy New Year!